Good. All right, so what I want to talk about now is the whole idea of distributive justice. And I'm particularly going to refer to this article in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy called Distributive Justice, which is by this person, Michael Allingham, who is at Oxford University. Now, I mean, this article, I would say, is written at a slightly technical level, and it's a little bit sort of user unfriendly. It takes a fair amount of careful attention to really understand it. So I won't necessarily be going into all the main details of the article. I think it is a useful article. But I will be using it as a sort of structure to kind of talk about the issues and for you to kind of think about what kind of society we should have and what sort of regulations we should have in our society. This morning I was like looking at you know the crash course videos. I was looking at like the crash course video on distributive justice. And that also like rushed. I think it was just crash course video on justice. Actually, it wasn't even just distributive. And they talked about a whole lot of stuff, and it went through stuff pretty quickly. But it was somewhat useful. So you might want to take a look at that at some point if you find that useful. I mean, it didn't have a whole lot of detail, but it did at least help to kind of raise the issues, and it does so in a pretty entertaining way. All right, so the whole idea of distributive justice is that is to work out how should we distribute the goods of society, and I guess in particular it is going to be thinking about things like taxes and how much taxes people should pay, and also about like what should be funded by taxes, and like so obviously things like healthcare, the welfare system. So in the United States, if you are unemployed or if you lose your job, you can often claim unemployment. But if you are if you fall below a certain level of income, you can often get other forms of welfare and healthcare. Like so, for example, Medicaid in the United States is for people who fall below a certain level of income, and they get some medical care through that. I was recently, I was on Medicaid for a year. It wasn't great. It was okay. It wasn't great. So that's the issue, distributive justice. And we're going to look at different theories of what the obligations of society should be. And the different theories kind of vary in kind of the levels of how much help should be given. And they're trying to give some kind of justification for those different levels. And as you might imagine, there's, it varies from a lot of state aid to very little state aid. So the four theories that the article talks about, you'll see in the table of contents. There's kind of justice of fairness, equality of resources, entitlements, and common ownership. So those are the four main theories the article talks about. And so some of that will be familiar from your previous readings, and some of it will be kind of new. But often the basic ideas actually are often actually relatively intuitive, but then the particular arguments for those ideas are far more kind of convoluted and confusing. So I guess at a minimum, I want you to get the basic ideas, and then we can try to maybe think about a little bit about the particular arguments for these views. But I guess to say a little bit about kind of the relationship between these and kind of more well-known political stances. Obviously, if you think about the United States of America, then there's a debate between Republicans and Democrats. And often it is said, or often Republicans claim that they are for lower taxes, and they accuse the Democrats of being for higher taxes. Whether that's actually borne out by how things actually work out, it may be more debatable. But certainly it tends to be that the Democrats are more in favor of kind of more social services, more help for people. And the Republicans tend to be a bit more on the line of like, it's up for individuals to sink or swim, and they should be in charge of their own lives. And there's less readiness to give a lot of support to people if they fall on hard times. Right? So that's the kind of rough idea. Now, I mean, for those of us like myself who come from other countries, you look at the United States and look at the two political parties, and often it seems like the choice is between like a far right party and a right party. So like the whole idea of there being like a left party is like, well, where's like the people on the left? But I mean, it varies. Obviously, the Democrats have a variety of opinions. There are people in the Democrats or associated with the Democrats who have more kind of more obviously left views. You've heard of people like Bernie Sanders, and AOC is like pretty well known for somebody who argues for fairly left views. But I mean, I've never seen like a true socialist in the arguing in the United States. Like, Bernie Sanders is not, I wouldn't say is like a real socialist. So it's interesting seeing like there's a whole bunch of views in other countries which don't really get represented much in the United States. One of the most obvious ones is communism, right? You've heard of communism, and presumably you are pretty sure that communism is bad. Well, why is communism bad? I guess the general idea is that people think it doesn't work. So the idea of communism is that the state takes over just about every function of society, and it runs it, and it controls it, and it aims to have kind of basic equality between everybody in society. And many people say, well, communism doesn't work because it provides no incentive for people to actually work hard. So, if the state is going to provide for everything, then the worry is that people will have very little motivation to work hard, and therefore, like, people will just like pretend to do their jobs, and they won't. And you hear a lot of stories about this former Soviet Union, not so much about China, but especially the former Soviet Union, like nothing really working and it being a sort of close to a failed state because people never did much work. So, I mean, there's a sort of assumption in communism that people will be motivated to work for their country. But it's often thought that it's a basic feature of human motivation that, and we've talked about motivation at various stages, that people don't really want to work for their country, they want to work for themselves. So if you're, it's going to be pretty rare for people to be really highly motivated to work for their country. And similarly, there are lots of stories about China in former eras, the idea that people should be working for the state rather than working for themselves. And people, and there's questions whether that really kind of panned out. It seems like it's actually quite hard to motivate people to just work for the good of the overall country. So there's debates about whether communism has ever kind of really worked. I guess another feature of communism, and this is debated, but communism often seems like there's often a lot of corruption in communism, in communist countries. Whether there's more corruption in communist countries than there is in Western countries, I guess you might have some debates about. But certainly, you look at the former Soviet Union. Well, it is the former Soviet Union. It didn't work out, right? It collapsed. And I guess the things in current Russia today are sort of, well, I mean, there's certainly a lot of private enterprise. There also seems to be still quite a lot of corruption. So Russia is an interesting case. China's obviously there's a lot of independent enterprise in China too. So there's a sort of curious cases of they're not really communist countries anymore. Now there are socialist countries where the state runs a lot of stuff, and one of the kind of central ideas of kind of socialism is like it's democratic. It's not kind of run completely by the state, but still the idea of socialism is that the state provides a great deal of services, and in socialism there's a huge amount of distrust of capitalism. There's a huge amount of distrust of corporations and private companies, because the basic premise is that corporations and private companies will ultimately be exploiting workers. So if the idea is that these things exploit workers, then the idea of socialism is that it's much better for the state to run those things because it'll go better. You won't have the evil corporations exploiting people. Rather, you'll have the state running things for the good of people. But it's still democratic, and there's a lot more sort of participation. Now, these days, and if you're thinking about socialist countries, you tend to think about places like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, but they aren't necessarily very socialist, but they do have a lot more kind of state-run things, and they are pretty well known for having very high taxes. I guess when I talk about very high taxes, I think, well, I live in the tri-state area. I own a house. Have you seen my property taxes? Like, and there are plenty of places in, I'm familiar with Long Island, like where their property taxes are $15,000 a year, $20,000 a year, $25,000 a year, even $30,000 a year. So like, sometimes I think, well, if you think that taxes are low in the United States, you haven't been looking at people's tax bills. Taxes aren't necessarily that low in the United States, right? If you go to other places, then property taxes are far less. I have a friend in Alabama. He has a nice place, and I think he pays $500 a year for his property tax. $500 a year. That's a lot less than what I pay. So definitely, like clearly there are places which would have far fewer taxes. I think sales tax in Alabama is 10%, so it's quite a lot higher. Right, so there's different ways of getting money. Okay, so we're thinking about kind of those sorts of kind of systems, and I guess that definitely it seems to me that often people who want to say that it's good to have something like a socialist system will point to places like Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, maybe sometimes also Iceland, as places which they argue things are going well. And also, if you look at like the general levels of happiness, those are meant to be like pretty much the happiest places in the world. If you look at like international lists of happiness, you'll find that the USA is about number 50. The USA is not a particularly happy country compared to a lot of other countries. I guess there's other things you might want to look at, such as social mobility, right? So we're talking about one of the things we're talking about is equality of opportunity. So one of the questions is, to what extent are you able to determine your own fate in life? Your own so there is this the American dream sort of thing that people who work hard can make it. And so the reason that often there's a sort of a assumption that goes along with that is that if your life is not going so well, it's because you're not working hard enough. And if you just worked a bit harder, then your life would go much better. But you look at social mobility and the idea that you can go from, like, say, being poor to rich. Well, it turns out actually that's it's much easier in a lot of other countries, especially countries like Denmark and Sweden and Finland. There's much more social mobility here. It tends to be in the United States that if you're born in a relatively poor family, the chances are you will stay relatively poor. So there's the level. I mean, obviously there are some cases, and you can see some examples of people who do have some social mobility and have changed, have improved their lot in life, but it's relatively infrequent to some other countries. So if you're thinking about opportunity, that's one of the things you want to look at, right? Okay, so I think that it gives you some picture of a very broad outline how things are in the US and some other countries with these broad political views. So the views we'll be looking at here are: there's justice of fairness, equality of resources, and equality of resources often thought of as a equality of opportunity idea. And then there's entitlements, and there is common ownership. So here are brief descriptions of those views, and these brief descriptions are pretty useful, I would say. So justice of fairness is associated with the ideas of John Rawls, who is a Harvard philosopher who died about, I think he died about 2001, something like that. And his most famous book was A Theory of Justice, published in 1971. So as this says, the idea is that it defines the distribution to be just if it maximizes the food that the individual with the least food receives. And food is more like a technical term here, like seems like the sort of basic goods that people need. So this is known as his maxi-min outcome in terms of food, which is the sole primary good. So it adjusts for preferences, ability, and land holding, and it's achieved by taxes and subsidies on income. Inequalities in income subject to the maxi-min requirement are accepted because of the benefit they bring to the individual with the least income. All inequalities in leisure are accepted. Rights to neither self-ownership nor resource ownership are maintained, and responsibility is not recognized. So the basic idea for this is that you're looking at how goods are distributed among the population. And the basic idea is that you want to have it so that it's going to be basically equal for everyone, unless having inequality benefits everyone. So how would having inequality benefit everyone? Well, it goes back to what I was saying about like the Soviet Union. It's like if people are motivated to get rich, then they'll work harder. So it can be that if you have a lot of people working hard, then that can benefit the whole of society. Then you're able to generate more money and more goods by having people working hard. So long as people are motivated to work hard and then generate goods, so you can think of the things that hard work creates. You can think of the computers and technology and machines, and that will generally improve the quality of life for everyone. So if you have that sort of benefit, then that ends up being good for the whole of society. So the idea of justice and fairness is like, sure, it's fine to have people kind of become even quite rich, so long as those people pay taxes, and the benefits that result from the motivation to becoming rich will end up benefiting the whole of society. But if there are inequalities which mean that some people suffer as a result of those inequalities, then it would not allow those inequalities. So one of the sort of striking things about this is that, I mean, basically it's going to adjust for people's preferences and abilities and land holdings, and it's going to sort of try and equalize things out. So certainly, it's not going to think that people should just benefit a lot from being born into a rich family. So the justice as fairness view is relatively close to a socialist view. It's relatively close to the idea that probably people should be taxed pretty highly for in terms of things like inheritance tax, and there should be a lot of taxes which will lead to the support for social services. So everybody should get a lot of benefit from taxes, and the taxes should go to support, say, free schools, obviously things like highways, and so there should be all sorts of benefits you get from the taxes. So of the four views that we're looking at, justice as fairness seems like the one which is most intent on having a very equal society. Now, equality of resources is especially related to, has been defended by the philosopher Dworkin, Ronald Dworkin, D-W-O-R-K-I-N. And he was a philosopher. He was English, and I think he had a sort of joint appointments both at Oxford University and at NYU. And so the equality of resources view says that there should be a distribution which is which gives everybody basically the same effective resources. That is, if for some given amount of work, each person could obtain the same amount of food or the primary goods. So it's achieved by taxes and subsidies, and inequalities in both food and leisure are accepted because they arise solely from choices made by individuals who have the same options. So there's there's going to be a lot, certainly this view will be pretty hostile to people being rich because of their families. So it's going to say people should be basically equal in opportunity, and you shouldn't have like trust fund kids who have an easy life because like they have rich parents. It's going to say like everybody, we should all basically have the same opportunity, and people should be able to kind of start from basically the same point. It's going to be accept while the justice of fairness view said like you can have inequalities that are due to which benefit everyone. This view says you can have inequalities when they result from people's choices and efforts. So you have two people who have the same options, and one person decides they're going to take life easy and like basically not do a whole lot, whereas the other person decides they're going to do a whole lot and they're going to really work on getting rich. Then that's okay. That's okay to have that kind of inequality. But it's not okay to have two people who are kind of going to have different starting points. So basically, everyone should have pretty much the same starting point in life. So we'll say more about that, but that's the equality of resources view linked to Dworkin. And then there's these two other views, which are both sort of known as libertarian views. And this libertarian view, the basic idea of libertarian view is that you should have a lot of liberty in living your life. And the most libertarian view here is the entitlement view, which is especially linked to the philosopher Robert Nozick, who died. He was a Harvard philosopher, and his most famous book about this was called Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And basically his view was that people should not be able to exploit each other. There shouldn't be anything like slavery. But so long as people get their income in ways which are honest and reasonable, then there should be no limits on how much money you should be able to have. And there should be certainly no problem in rich people passing on their money to their kids. So Robert Nozick would have no problem with trust fund kids. Right? He would say, that's fine. You choose who to give your money to. And if you want to give your money to your kids and give your kids an extra boost in their chances, then that should be fine. No problem with that. and in fact, he said basically his view is that government should have an extremely limited role. In order to have a society, government does need to do some things, right? So government does need a justice system to sort out disputes and you need a police force to kind of stop people from committing crimes. You also need an army to defend your country against other countries. So you'll need to have taxpayers' money going to the justice system and the police force and the armed services. But it seems like apart from that, he didn't really think your taxes should go to pay for anything else. So, for example, I'm not exact. I mean, this may be a little extreme in terms of my representation of him. But for example, roads. He didn't. Certainly, you can have an extreme libertarian position which says the government shouldn't be paying for roads. If you want to have a road, then people should get together and use their money to build one. And then you can have a toll road, and people can make a profit from the toll road. So that would mean that every single road would either be given like in terms of like a charitable donation from some people, or it would mean that every road should be a toll road. So if you want to travel on that road, you pay a certain amount of tax to be on that road. You know, like so obviously the toll roads we have these days, you're on the interstate, you have your easy pass and you go through and you pay your money. So I guess these days you do it, you'd have your easy pass for every single road you go on. Then the government would not pay, you wouldn't be paying any of your taxes for those roads. You'd be individuals who want to drive should then pay for whoever made the road. Similarly, K through 12 education. The government shouldn't be paying for that. Why should I be paying for your kids' education? That's not my business for the libertarian view. If you want to have kids and you want to get them educated, you pay for it. So it should be that if you want to have kids, then you will pay for your child's education from whatever age they get educated. And then obviously, welfare. No, it's not the government's job to provide welfare. So if you fall on hard times, then hopefully there will be like charitable organizations like churches and maybe neighborhood organizations. Maybe maybe especially you rely on your family to help you out if you fall on hard times, if you lose your job, if you become ill, you get your family to help you out. But again, the idea is it's not the government's job to look after you if you're unlucky. So this is a pretty extreme libertarian view, and it says the government should be doing very little indeed. So the main thing that the main worries, the main thing you should be concerned about from this libertarian point of view is making sure that people obey the law. They don't enslave each other. They don't cheat each other. If somebody steals something, there's some ways to stop, to kind of correct that and stop that. But basically, apart from that, I'm protecting the country from kind of basic kind of threats. The government should be doing very little. So obviously on this view, the taxes should be very low, and it would seem. So then there's a question: well, how's this going to work out? Often this libertarian view is also linked to a very strong belief in how great capitalism is. So the idea is that capitalism is a great thing, and that if you just let capitalism work with very few constraints, then everybody will be doing great. Because like people who are poor will be motivated to work hard, and then they will make money. And if there are problems, then because of social problems, people will be motivated. There'll be capitalist solutions to those problems. So rather than thinking that government will solve these problems, the idea is that society, individuals in society will come forward and solve problems without government. In the same way, in sort of flip side of socialism, I talked about how socialism had a lot of belief in government and suspicion of private corporations. Libertarians tend to be extremely suspicious of government and to think that government programs generally are not run well and are extremely inefficient. So the idea is that if from the libertarian point of view, the idea is that if you insist on government running things, then it's going to be terrible. Government is really bad at running things, and people will. I guess one example people seem to really love is comparing the United States Postal Service with UPS. Well, I guess now you might even think about comparing it with Amazon. So like, people say, like, have you been to a post office recently? Like, if you go to a post office, especially in New York City, and not so much on Long Island, you can be waiting for half an hour. Has anybody have you been to a post office? Like, it's a lot. It can be a long wait, right? Whereas if you go to UPS, it's much quicker, and things are much faster. We're definitely familiar with the way that Amazon has like transformed the whole parcel delivery stuff, and you can get your 2-day Prime deliveries really quickly, and now all around you see all the Amazon Prime trucks delivering stuff. So you might point to that as like, look how great private enterprise is, and is so much better than a government-run service. I guess you might. I mean, as a sort of kind of counter to that, you might think about. Suppose you want to send a letter to somebody in the countryside. Are you going to choose UPS or are you going to choose the Postal Service? Well, you might want to look at the different prices. I think how much does a stamp cost now? Is it about 30 cents or 50 cents, something like that? How much would it cost to send a letter by UPS? I think it's going to be a few dollars at least. So you might think that actually the kind of postal service actually provides a pretty cheap service compared to UPS. I grew up in England, and when I grew up, there was a lot of the main industries were run by the government. So the things like gas and electric and the phone service was all run by the government. And then Maggie Thatcher came along. You may have heard of Maggie Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, the first female prime minister of the United Kingdom. And she privatized just about all of that. And it was sort of remarkable how it did seem like private enterprise made things more efficient. There was like having competition between different companies meant that things actually did get cheaper and services got better. So I mean, you can. It does seem like you can make an argument, at least for some things, that having capitalism and free competition between companies ends up being far more efficient than a government-run service where there's no competition. So that's one of the things that libertarians often point to when they're looking at the advantages of not having government-run stuff. They say, look, society just works a whole lot more efficiently and better when you just leave everything to free enterprise. So that's the claim. In order to I mean, whether you can actually prove that and whether you can really make a demonstration that in all cases capitalism works better, I think is a sort of a tricky question. And there is, this debate between the kind of people who are big believers in capitalism and people who are suspicious of capitalism. There's the question, like, to what extent do companies tend to exploit people? To what extent do we need protections from capitalism? Because you might think about the 19th century, where there were increasing restrictions on companies and capitalism. I mean, if you've ever read your Charles Dickens, you'll remember all like the chimney sweeps who were like 10 years old going up chimneys, because like young kids are pretty good to put up a chimney because they're small and they can fit up a chimney, so they can be good as chimney sweeps. And there were lots of kids working in factories. And it's so that, I mean, I guess these days we have sort of similar worries about especially clothing production in other countries, where there are plenty of stories about young kids being forced to work in factories. So, I mean, do we trust capitalist companies? Do we trust big companies to treat people well? Or do they need a lot of government restriction? And I guess you might think about also like about democracy. If people, there's freedom of information and people know that a company exploits people, does that mean that everybody kind of uses their collective morality to say, oh, I'm not going to shop there? I guess Nike was a company which got into some problems because there were stories about its shoes being made in factories where they had lots of kids working. And was there a big movement from the United States? Did a lot of customers say, well, I'm never going to buy from Nike again because they employ young kids? I don't know. I mean, well, Nike is definitely still around. Maybe it's changed its ways. I mean, there's a question about to what extent regular consumers are going to change their purchasing behavior as a result of kind of what they hear about the companies. I'm not exactly sure whether people really change a lot of their purchasing behavior because of some stories they heard about the bad things that the company does. It may well be that a lot of people just choose the what's best for them, and they don't really worry too much about that stuff. All right, so that's the entitlement view associated with Robert Nozick. Now, the fourth view that we're looking at is known as the common ownership view. And in some ways, I think of the four views we're looking at, this is like the more obscure one, the one which is less well known, and is in some ways more kind of hazy or fuzzy in its details, exactly what it is kind of promoting. But the basic idea is it's still like a libertarian view, but it's much more ready to have restrictions on corporations and more taxes. And so basically it says that it will adjust for what this article calls land holdings. So it does aim for some reallocation of basic resources. And so long as people have so I think this libertarian view is libertarian to an extent, but basically what it wants to say is that there should be limits on gifts. And so basically it's saying that, yeah, for each generation, there should be a great deal of freedom, but it should be far less possible for rich parents to make their kids rich. So basically every generation should start from the same starting point. So like there could be basically very few restrictions on people, except that you shouldn't be able to be born into a rich family and therefore have a much better life than everyone else automatically. I think the idea of rich families is kind of a very interesting one, because like we're so familiar with that idea that, I think it seems pretty obvious to us that there are plenty of rich families, and that if you were born into a rich family, then you get a lot of advantages. I think many people, if you've heard of, say, the private high schools, you hear a lot about them, the private high schools in Manhattan. I think there's a lot of private high schools like on the Upper East Side and maybe Upper West Side. There are also famous private high schools like up in New England, maybe some in California. And the idea is like you go to a private high school, it costs a huge amount of money, but then it means that you not only do you get a good education, but it also means that you end up mixing with other kids from rich families. So how is that if you spend your high school living among the rich people? Well, then you get a lot of advantages from those connections. Similarly, then if you a lot of those private high schools will then get the kids into Ivy League, get the students into Ivy League colleges. Ivy League colleges are extremely expensive. And then if you go to an Ivy League college, you're mixing with other people from often very rich families. And you get a lot of advantages from that too. So you spend your whole life up to the age of about 21 or 22, being surrounded by people from other rich families. So you get not only do you get the advantages of having money, but you also get the social advantages from having those connections. And generally, it means that if you know a lot of rich people, then your life goes better because you get the connections. So if you're in, like, say, in business, you can get help with your business is going to go better because you can get other rich people to help you. Whereas if you from a poor family, then you don't have those connections. You get very little advantage from that. So it means that your life is going to go differently. So it seems then that the common ownership theories do a lot to are concerned about those particular advantages that people get from their initial circumstances, and they're much more willing to consider high inheritance tax and kind of more tax to level out the playing field between rich and poor. So, so those are the four theories. And I think they in some ways, one of the sort of strange things is like these theories don't really get spelled out a lot in American politics. There's much more kind of like more kind of slogans, and so there's a sort of mismatch between these theories and how we think about things in American politics. But I mean, one of the things we do think about is like, to what extent is inequality something that we are happy with versus something that we think we should do more about? And to what extent is like, if somebody's born, to what extent does things they have no control of, should we say, well, that's too bad, you're just unlucky? I think it's worth saying a little bit more about different ways that you might be unlucky. So we might think that being born into a rich family is a form of luck. Being born into a poor family is a form of being unlucky. Now, how about being born with a major disability? That seems also to be a form of being unlucky. And we might think, well, is it okay that your life is going to go less well as a result of that? Should we say, well, no, if you have a disability, then that's too bad. Like, it's not your, like, sure, like your life is not going to go so well, but that's just the luck of the draw. And then I guess we might look at we might think about differences, not about disabilities, but some people who are very creative and very entrepreneurial. So we might say, look, I mean, some people are just really smart and enterprising. And we might want to say, look, it's not your fault you were born not that smart or not that enterprising, but you know, there's no reason why you should have the same quality of life as somebody who is smart and enterprising. So there's questions about like what kinds of inequality we think are okay and reasonable, and what kinds of inequality we think are definitely unreasonable. Now, I mean, obviously in the United States of America, one of the kind of huge things we face is historic inequalities. Right? So the historic inequalities, they obviously come to mind are the inequalities between men and women, and inequalities between different ethnic and racial groups. So to say a little bit about the differences between men and women, obviously, to some extent, you know, that's been a large part of the history of the United States, and that's been gradually corrected with the introduction of things like the right to vote, the right to equal pay. But I mean, if you look at, say, how many CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are women? Well, I think it's something like, you know, maybe 10%, 15%. But why is that? You might think, oh, the reason for that is like women don't really want to be rich. They prefer to do other stuff. Oh, is that convincing? I mean, I would suggest that probably, I mean, are men more ambitious than women? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if that's an easy thing to say, right? I don't think we have like, for one thing, we are kind of in a culture which still has quite different cultural expectations of boys and girls, and still treats boys and girls quite differently. And boys get blue, girls get pink. If you go to the toy store, there are different toys for boys and girls. So I think it's kind of hard to say whether like, oh, definitely like kind of girls just don't really want to go into that kind of cutthroat world of business. They just want to kind of have an easier life. Some people say that, but it seems like, well, that you need to have evidence for that. So that, and I guess maybe we should assume generally that unless we can prove it otherwise, that women probably just are as ambitious as men. Why should it be otherwise? So maybe there is a real worry about the idea that if you look at business and maybe also politics. I mean, like, you know, the US has still not had a still have not had a female president. When you look at all these other countries, like India, England, Germany, you get female heads of state. Why is it that the America can't do that? And if you look at Congress and the Senate, it's still very much male dominated, right? So why is that? So you might still think that there is systematic discrimination against women. If there is, then it seems like that's something like that even libertarians should be worried about, because it seems then like there isn't actually kind of total kind of individual freedom, but rather some people have sort of systematic discrimination against. And then there's issues of racial inequality. And obviously in the United States, that is especially acute because of the history of slavery and the after effects of the history of slavery. And not just history of slavery, but also the history of segregation and systematic discrimination against African Americans and all other people of color. So then there's big questions about how do libertarians deal with that, because it seems like that has created systematic inequality, and so there isn't like true liberty, equal liberty there. And so it does seem like that is something that even libertarians need to kind of think about, and certainly even Robert Nozick, who was like famously for freedom, was actually very concerned about those sorts of systematic inequalities, and he thought there needed to be some government response to actually reduce that, to kind of take account of that. I mean, there's been a lot of talk over the years of various kinds of reparations to African Americans and other groups for the kind of systematic discrimination against them. And I think from a libertarian point of view, the way you might try and justify that is in the idea of kind of trying to guarantee equal liberty for all. So that might be what, even from a libertarian point of view, to actually take account of that sort of systematic discrimination. All right, so and if you look at the rest of these articles, there is a great deal more detail, and I would definitely encourage you to be kind of looking at that as we go along. But for now, that's the basic kind of setting out of those details, and so I'll stop that there.